Hello, everybody. This is Robert Barton. I'm the host for today's webinar, Amphibians and Forest Management. Today's webinar is brought to us by the North Carolina Tree Farm Program. But before we get into that, just quick logistics for today's webinar. We'll be taking questions throughout the webinar, but we won't get to answering them till the end of the presentation. So please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. All you have to do is click on that little Q&A icon and you'll be able to enter your question, and we'll get to those with our presenter at the end of the webinar. As I indicated, today's webinar is brought to us by North Carolina Tree Farm Program, and we appreciate all their effort in pulling these webinars together for the audience. And with that, let me introduce Leslie McCormick. She is the director for the Tree Farm Program here in North Carolina. Leslie?
Thank you, Bob, and thank you all for being here with us today. It's my privilege to introduce Jeff Hall, who is our presenter today, and he's going to talk about amphibians and forest management. Jeff is the statewide herpetologist for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission and the program lead for the North Carolina Partners in an Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Program. He works with landowners to promote habitat management practices that benefit reptiles, amphibians, and other wildlife species. He also participates in field work on a variety of projects, including rare amphibian monitoring and habitat restoration, upland state conservation, and a project on the bog turtle. Jeff also manages a project that monitors long-term trends of frog and toad populations throughout North Carolina. Jeff, thank you for being here today, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thanks so much, Leslie. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share mine. Good to go, Bob and Leslie? All right, let's see here. All right, give me a nod if y'all can see my screen. All right, perfect. Well, thank you for inviting me to be here today, and thank you all participants for joining in. Jump into learning a little bit more about amphibians. Some of you may know a lot, some of you may know a little. I'll cover it all in spades, as well as some things about forest management as well. Let's see here. Click on this. There we go. Okay, quick 2-second advertisement. For those of you that don't know, our program with the North Carolina Wildlife Commission is supported by the North Carolina Non-Game and Endangered Wildlife Fund. There's a variety of ways you could potentially consider contributing to that if you so wish. The one I really want to point out today is that license plate with the Pine Barrens tree frog on it. Very topical for our amphibian talk today. Important to note, if you want that plate, you should try to get one soon, because we will be replacing that image with a white-tailed deer. Now, some of you may be more excited about the white-tailed deer plate, and that's fine too. But if you want the frog, act now, as they say on the online ads. So that's all I'll say about that. Also, I just quick advertisement for another group that I help coordinate, NC Park, NC Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation. You can go to ncpark.org and click on the links there, and you can join for free and get information emailed periodically to you. And that's all I'm going to say about NC Park today. So amphibians. So our task today is hopefully for smoke to not just come out of your ears as we go through this, because we're going to try to cover about half a semester of a herpetology class in less than an hour. Can we do it? I think we can. So we'll start off with a few basics about amphibians. They are difficult to see a lot of times. Camouflage is their ally. You probably can't even tell there's things in those pictures. Actually, those are all 3 snakes, so I cheated just a little tiny bit. But amphibians use crypsis as well. They are really important to ecosystems, both as prey and predator. So really, really important role in the whole food chain type deal. Some specifics about amphibians. Permeable skin. This is really critical. So air and water can pass through the skins of amphibians. This is makes them sort of the canary in the coal mine, if you will. So if you go in an area you're expecting X number of amphibians, and some of them are there, some of them are not there. Gives you an idea that something's going on with water or air or both. So they can be a good indicator of overall environmental quality. Generally speaking, they have a decent sense of smell, and they prey on other, mostly invertebrates, but they will also eat vertebrates as they can. And as it says here, just about anything that can fit into their mouths for various species, that's definitely the case. Habitats, where do we find these things? Well, it might be rivers and streams that look like this. It could be smaller ponds that look like this. Maybe it's ponds that dry up every once in a while that look something like this. In fact, here's one in the Piedmont that dried up in one particular year. So sometimes they look like that. They might be in forests that look like this. This is a longleaf system here. Maybe it's a mixed pine hardwood block, something like this. Sometimes they'll be in caves and even in seeps and small little streams. And then, of course, here's what maybe some of us think of mountain salamander habitat, classic sort of stuff. So we'll start off with our frogs and toads. And if you don't know the word anurans, it's because they're the order Anura. That's a good way to just say quickly frogs and toads. So there's always this wrestling thing, right? Is it a frog? Is it a toad? What's the difference? You know, generally speaking, common names are just that. They're used to help us commonly identify different species. And frog, that term generally means something that's sort of slippery, slimy, wet skins. Toad usually has drier skin, maybe a little bit warty, but there's a lot of overlap in that. And even some individuals have common names that are confusing. A good example is this frog up here in the upper right. It's called the eastern narrowmouth toad. Now, one of its closest relatives is called the sheep frog. So there you have two close relatives. One's a toad, one's a frog. Which one are they? Well, it doesn't matter in the end. The common name is just a common name. But generally speaking, toad's a little bit wartier skin, frogs a little bit wetter skin, smoother skins. But if you want to be real fancy, you can call them anurans, and you'll have them all together in one place. My goal today is try to share with you some of the diversity that we see in our state, both of anurans and salamanders. And so as we go through these, I'm certainly not going to try to cover all the species that occur in North Carolina, but maybe give you a little snapshot into some of these species and some of the things and habits that they have. So some things about anurans. We have 5 different families of frogs and toads in North Carolina. Sometimes it's helpful to think about them in terms of families because they share characteristics, and that can help us identify them when we see them in the field. 31 species in North Carolina. Well, historically, if we add them all together, that's probably right. If you look at most field guides, they'll say 30 species because we have one that was added relatively recently, the Atlantic coast leopard frog, within the last decade. But one of those species, the river frog, has not been seen in over 30 years. So maybe that one's not still here. Maybe we're down to 30 species. Like I say, 31, at least historically, in North Carolina. All share fairly similar life cycle, breathing, reproduction type of deal. We'll see very different types of situations with our salamanders in a little bit. The coastal plain really has the most species of frogs and toads, but we'll see the opposite of that with salamanders. And one helpful thing is that our frogs and toads vocalize, and those can be really useful in identifying species. So let's take a look. Oh, sorry, a little bit about their life cycle. This is important too. So you'll have frogs that are calling. They're on the left. The males are the ones that call. That attracts potentially other males to the same wetland, but also attracts females. Then you'll have amplexus, where that's a male that's clasping on top of a female in the upper left there, this picture here. The female will deposit her eggs, and then the male externally fertilizes those eggs. So that's why he's holding on to her, so he can make sure he's fertilizing her eggs. Those eggs will hatch out, develop into tadpoles, as you see on the right there. Eventually, those tadpoles will trade their gills for lungs. They will grow legs, reduce their tail, and then they will go through metamorphosis and pop out of the pond as a small frog, as you see on the bottom there. And the cycle will continue all over again. All of the frogs and toads in North Carolina use this same pathway, the same life cycle. However, in the world, there are frogs and toads that skip the larval phase entirely, something we call direct development, where the eggs hatch out into tiny versions of the adults. So we do have some frogs like that in the world, just not in North Carolina. There is one frog, the greenhouse frog, which has been introduced into Florida and now Georgia and now South Carolina. So it is possible that one day we will also have a direct developed frog in North Carolina, the greenhouse frog, but it does not occur here yet. So importance for frogs and toads are breeding wetlands. Since they all have an aquatic larval stage, they all need this. Now, this could be a time series of a pond over, some series of time. It's not, though. These were all taken in one spot, all on one day. And the importance of this is showing that it's really important for frogs and toads to have multiple wetlands to lay their eggs in. This is all the same species, actually. But in the upper left, those tadpoles are probably maybe going to make it. The ones in the upper right, perhaps if they get some rain. Bottom left, it's looking iffy, although they were still alive. Ones on the bottom right, most of those are already dead. So the whole adage, you don't want all your eggs in one basket, that certainly fits for frogs and toads. And so thinking of landscape scale and management of systems, it's always better if you have many multiple wetlands that these animals can choose to breed in. A word about the maps that you're going to see on each account that we're looking at. So on the left there is a field guide map where you have a typical range map and you have some idea of where they might occur. On the right is a museum dot map, which is I'm borrowing today from the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Each solid dot represents a specimen that's in a collection somewhere, and the hollow dots represent where someone has identified the animal, but we don't have a specimen necessarily, but it's usually someone who knows what they're talking about, like perhaps me or someone else that has a herpetology background. So you'll see those, and one way those are helpful is that they can point out places where we might be missing some information. Like if you see a county where a dot is missing in between a bunch of other counties where there's dots, you could note, well, probably that's worth going and looking for that animal there. It probably occurs there and no one's looked before. It can help us generate new records by using maps like this. So let's jump right into a couple of frogs here. You will see on each of these slides, you'll see the common names of the species, a little bit of the scientific names. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on scientific names today, so you don't need to worry about that, but they will be there. If you see an asterisk by one of the scientific names, it just means that there are other names that some folks might suggest could be used, but I'm going to use the names that you see on the slides. And in the middle, you'll usually see the family name of the group of animals, Hylidae in this case. I'm not going to refer to that a whole lot, just to let you know it's going to be there on each slide if you have an interest in learning how some of these animals are related to one another. So these maps on the bottom show us that both the northern cricket frog and the spring peeper are found across much of the state. Northern cricket frog in the west, peeper pretty much across the whole state. The northern cricket frog is basically replaced with the southern cricket frog across most of the coastal plain. We have a number of chorus frogs in North Carolina. Most of them have chorus frog in their name, except for the spring peeper. So things like upland chorus frog, southern chorus frog, ornate chorus frog, Brimley's chorus frog, all in that same group. But I'm going to just share at least a couple of these with you. Both of these frogs pretty small, an inch and a half as adult size. So cricket frog for the size of the frog, not necessarily the sound it makes. But speaking of sound, let's see what these guys listen to. It'd be tough to do frogs without listening to them a little bit. Sounds to me a little bit like clicking marbles together. If I can find my mouse again. There it is. And there we go. Sort of a quick rapid fire clicking going on there. The spring peeper sounds a bit more like its name. It's sort of a peeping sound. You might have heard these in the wintertime, despite that they're called spring peepers. We typically start hearing them around December, some years even earlier. So we should really call these winter peepers. Continuing in that same family, we have a bunch of tree frogs in North Carolina, and these are just three I chose for today. Probably the most common one across the state is the Cope's gray tree frog here on the right. Got a nice little white patch under his eye. These frogs can change color to some degree. Gray tree frogs are almost always gray, but sometimes they're green, especially if they're juveniles. Pinewoods tree frogs are often gray, but sometimes they can be all green, with little patches of gray maybe throughout their body. And then green tree frogs pretty much always green. Occasionally in the winter, you might see one that is either brown or a dark color. These guys all have little digits on their toes, sort of like E.T., the little suction cups that help them climb. That is one of the features of all the frogs that are in this family, Hylidae. They have that little toe cup. It just so happens that with the tree frogs, theirs are exaggerated more and aid them in climbing. And so these guys really do climb trees. Let's see what some of them sound like. Coatsbury tree frog, kind of a metallic trill. Occasionally hear that other little call in there, which is two males close together, sort of a. That's a whole bunch of them. Pinewoods tree frogs sound a bit like Morse code frog. And these guys will call during the daytime as well. Generally speaking, frogs call best, at night, but some species will call readily during the day, pinewoods tree frogs being one of those. You'll notice they're mostly found in the coastal plain, tiny bit into the Piedmont. Same with the green tree frog, although the green tree frog map, I really need to have an updated version of this. They actually now occur through many of these Piedmont counties. Unlike many amphibians that actually have had declines in their ranges, green tree frogs and squirrel tree frogs, for that matter, have actually expanded their ranges westward and northward. Let's listen to the green tree frog, perhaps a little duck-like. Another tool for identifying our tree frogs is if you have them in your hand, the concealed surfaces of their legs reveal different colors that can help you identify them. So maybe you think the gray tree frog and the pinewoods tree frog look pretty similar. If you have them in your hand, you'll see the pinewoods tree frog actually has a purple wash with yellow spots on it, where the gray tree frog has a yellow or orange wash with yellow spots on it. And then the green tree frog sort of has a purple wash. Squirrel tree frog has a little bit of a yellow wash. So each one has something that looks a little bit different. And once you learn those, it can also help with identification, in addition to, of course, the calling. Switching families, the larger frogs, these are the bullfrog-like frogs, and there's the bullfrog on the right there, our largest frog. These guys are one of those that will eat just about anything they can get in their mouths, including lots of other frogs, salamanders, snakes, even small rodents, and occasionally birds. All right, and the leopard frog, let's listen to him. Sort of chuckling like you're rubbing the side of a blown up balloon. Southern leopard frogs occur throughout most of the state, except not quite into the mountains. But they can be mistaken for the pickerel frog. We won't go over them today. But pickerel frogs, the spots are a little more squared and a little more paired, whereas the leopard frog looks like if you took your paintbrush and you're trying to clean it off and you just flick it wherever the paint happens to fall, you get that haphazard spotting. And that's sort of the way leopard frogs look, again, versus pickerel frogs. Another family here found in North Carolina, the true toads. These are the ones that look like a toad, feel like a toad, everyone would call a toad. And so two species that I've got featured today are the Fowler's toad and the southern toad. Southern toad mostly in the coastal plain, and then it's replaced by the American toad into the Piedmont and mountains. So you see that species there. And then the Fowler's toad really occurs pretty much all across the state. Now, southern toads have a real high-pitched trill. Let's listen to that. It's possible some of you may have trouble hearing this one. It is pretty high-pitched. It's really long, too. Can be up to 30 seconds long, which is pretty long for a frog call. The American toad is about an octave below that, so that can help you, but it sounds similar. It's that long trill. Fowler's toad, on the other hand, sounds a little bit like a crying baby to me, sort of a wah. And there's a good bit of variation in color. An important thing to say about all amphibians is the variability can be important. I should have mentioned that with the cricket frog, especially. They can be all sorts of different colors, not just the colors that you saw with that one that had a lot of green on it. But that's the same case with a lot of species, and toads can be that way. Fowler's toads generally have that stripe that runs down the middle, but occasionally it's not quite as obvious. Usually there's more than 3 warts per spot or more spots per wart, depends on what you think about it. But each one of these is sort of thought of as a spot, and then those little raised things are warts inside there. Will toads give you warts? No, they won't. That's the short answer. But identifying them can sometimes be a little bit challenging, especially if they're small ones. Some of the things that you use to identify the toads, besides their calling, of course, is looking at the ridges on their head. These cranial ridges can be important, as well as this little ridge behind the eye, whether that connects to this gland. These glands here are called parotoid glands, which is essentially a toxin gland. If you've ever seen a dog grab a toad, a lot of times they'll spit the toad right back out because the toad doesn't taste good. Well, it's that toxin that the toad is exuding from those glands to help protect itself. And the way that those different ridges connect to that gland, as well as the shape of that gland, can help you identify different species of toads as well. We will not go into a lot more of that today, but get yourself a good field guide and you'll be able to look at those different pieces and maybe be able to tease out which toads you're seeing around you. Has toad in its name, but also, again, this is that one that has a relative, the sheep frog, that sounds actually quite similar. Eastern narrowmouth toad, perhaps one of my favorite sounding frogs, so I have to play him for you. Makes me smile whenever I hear them. Very sheep-like, sort of bleating. How can you not just enjoy that, right? Oh, that's fun. One other thing about frogs and toads is that very often the males will have a darker throat than the females, or the throat will be a different color than the belly as compared to the females. So in the picture on the bottom right, the left animal is a male, the right animal is a female. And so that actually works for a lot of species. Not absolutely every one, because some frogs actually have dual vocal sacs on the sides of their heads, whereas like narrowmouth toads and many of our tree frogs and many of our other toads have that single vocal sac, which again lends itself to additional skin in that area, which usually makes it a different color. Sometimes it's black, like here in the narrowmouth, sometimes orange, sometimes yellowish. So the color of that skin is not necessarily consistent, but it will be different looking from the belly. Again, female throat and belly will look pretty much the same. Narrowmouth found throughout much of our state, including a lot of the Piedmont. A lot of records still to be gleaned probably from much of our Piedmont where they probably occur, but we just don't necessarily have them represented here. And then our final frog and toad species, or family, I should say, is the eastern spadefoot. Sometimes has toad on the end of it, sometimes not. Spadefoots are really pretty fantastic animals. They are explosive breeders, which means that when we get really, really heavy rainfall, they show up in giant numbers. They may actually wait out periods of drought for many years and then show up in places you wouldn't expect them to be. They have the shortest larval period of any of our frogs and toads. Some of them, like, say, bullfrogs, can take a couple of years to go from tadpole to go through metamorphosis. But spadefoot toads can do it in the shortest time of close to a week. They can go as quickly as 7 to 10 days. Usually it's a little bit longer than that, but they can get out pretty quickly. They're usually extremely tiny when they go with that really, really short metamorphosis period. But it does allow them to colonize water bodies that don't have water for very long. And so again, that's why they can be sort of explosive breeders and take advantage. Think about in your yard when you get a really heavy rain, somewhere that holds water for a week or two that isn't really a pond. Those are the kinds of places that spadefoots can use, in addition to actual ponds out on the landscape. So pretty fantastic toads. I love them. Okay, moving on to salamanders. Hopefully I know I'm going fast, but I want to give you some background in these things. We have roughly 80 some species of salamanders. Salamanders are probably the one where a lot of folks are spending a lot of time, especially on genetics, trying to figure out, okay, these two look really similar, but they don't actually recognize each other as self, or their genetics are just different enough that we don't think they're the same species. So there's a lot of work going on in that case. If I was giving you the same presentation 20 years ago, I might say there's plus or minus 45 or so salamanders. So we've really seen a pretty significant change in what's going on. Lots of cool things going on with salamanders. Let's dig in. So there are 7 families, so 2 more families than what we saw with the frogs and toads. Mentioned plus or minus 80. There's tons of variation in how they live their lives, how they breathe, how they reproduce, lots of different things, different than what we saw with the frogs and toads. The mountains, in this case, have a greater number of species than other parts of the state. They can represent significant biomass, in some cases, more than all the other vertebrates combined in some areas. So pretty amazing how many of these things there can be on the landscape. They use pheromones for lots of things, but especially during breeding season, and they can be really, really important to for salamanders to be able to do the things that they do. Okay, so a little bit about life cycles of salamanders. So generally speaking, we have a fair number that do what the cycle that's shown here, where you have an adult, 2 adults show up at a breeding spot. There's an egg mass that gets laid upper right there. Then in the bottom right, the eggs hatch out and you have larvae that swim around, look a little bit like tadpoles, but notice they have external gills. That's one big difference between larval salamanders and larval frogs and toads. I.e. tadpoles, they have internal gills. So salamanders have these external gills. Eventually they go through metamorphosis, lose those gills for lungs, come out on land like that tiny version there on the bottom left, and the cycle repeats itself. However, like I mentioned, there's lots of variation with our salamanders, and some of them skip the larval phase entirely. In fact, a fair number of them, and have that direct development where the eggs are laid, doesn't have to be in water, can be just under a log. They hatch out and they're tiny versions of the adult, and the cycle continues. But really cool in the salamander world, we also have ones that I call the Peter Pan effect here, where they never want to grow up. And so we have ones that never sort of metamorphose. They never lose their gills. They lay eggs in water, they hatch out in water, and they remain in water their entire lives. They may retain gills. They may have lungs in some cases. Many of them retain external gills. So we'll see all of these variations going on with the species of salamanders in North Carolina. One quick thing, a lot of times people get confused about lizards, salamanders. We're not going to talk a lot about reptiles today, but lizards do have scales, which allows them to avoid being desiccated or drying up in the sun. So if you see an animal that's out scampering around in the daytime, that is almost definitely a lizard, not a salamander. Salamanders are not usually out in the daytime, usually only out moving around at night. In the daytime, you might have to turn over cover objects like logs or things like that to locate salamanders. Because their skins are porous, they would dry out if they're just out and about. Generally have smooth, slimy skins, no claws as opposed to lizards, and many of them, as I mentioned already, are gilled as larvae, but not all of them. We'll see. So the first family we're going to look at is Amphiumidae. This is the two-toed Amphiuma, one of my favorites. These guys can get pretty large. They actually get the largest of any of our amphibians, at least the longest. They can get up to 45 inches long, and that is a big salamander. Generally, about that big around if you get one that big. So they can get quite large. They have pretty significant teeth, pedicellate teeth, that allow them to crunch up prey items that they come across. They really like crayfish. They eat a lot of crayfish, and they can eat them whether they are freshly molted when they're softer or whether they're just, in regular hard-shelled crayfish mode. They just crush them up and suck up all the juices sort of left behind, and they are an impressive predator for sure. Primarily found in the coastal plain, but barely make their way into the Piedmont just a little bit. Really, really cool animals. Similar looking, yet, I forgot to mention one other super cool thing that's going to also apply to the siren. So Amphiumas and sirens are both kind of amazing survival team salamanders. They are able to survive. They have gills, lungs, and breathe through their skin. So in the case of the Amphiuma, the gills and lungs are both internal. And if they're living in water, they'll use their gills and breathe that way and be able to take in dissolved oxygen. If the DO starts to drop, they'll actually gape from the air and breathe through their lungs. If the pond dries up, they'll build kind of a cocoon with some mucus around their skin, breathe through their skin, and they'll just lay there some sort of dormant until the whole body of water fills with water again. And then they come out of their cocoon and continue the rest of their life cycle. Just amazing that they're able to survive that way. They also do have two little tiny toes on the end of these tiny little arms. Barely can see those, I know, but there's two little toes on the end of those. And they have 4 legs. So they have 2 legs in the front and 2 legs in the back. You just can't really see them. There's a lot going on in that photo. So compared to the greater siren, which is another large salamander, sirens only get up to 30 inches, which is still a pretty big salamander. They only have front legs. They don't have back legs, but their legs are much larger and they look more like you would expect a salamander leg to look like, you know, something you can recognize as a leg as opposed to something that looks like a finger that was stuck in a leg socket. They do have external gills, as you can see in this larval picture down below. A little hard to see that in the ones that are out of the water, but they do have external gills on the sides of their heads. They also have lungs. And again, they do all those cool things with being able to dig in when it's drying up. You'll see this term SGCN on some of my slides. That means species of greatest conservation need. Those are species that we pay attention to, that are ones that we focus a little more effort on. In the mountains, we have eastern hellbenders. These guys are special concern species, and so that makes them an SGCN as well. They get quite large, only about 25 inches long, but they can get several pounds. So they can get to be pretty big. Also eat lots of crayfish. Really, really awesome salamanders. They need nice, clear water that's nice and cool. So anyway, really, really cool critters. Neuse river water dog. This is a species that's only found in North Carolina. We don't have a lot of those, but this is one of those. Not found in any other states, just found in the Neuse and the Tar drainages, as you see on the map there. They get a decent size as well, somewhere in the 6 to 8 inch range. And they retain external gills throughout their lives, and they have 4 legs, as you see here. We have 2 other water dogs, or mud puppies, as they're sometimes called, in North Carolina. Really, really neat animals. Moving to the mole salamander group. This is perhaps some of our more handsome salamanders. The spotted salamander is obviously really a beautiful salamander. These are both males. They tend to be a little bit more brightly colored than the females are, especially during breeding season. You can see some egg masses in the upper right there. And spotted salamanders occur throughout most of the Piedmont Mountains, but really only a few tiny spots in the coastal plain. Another beautiful salamander in the same group, the marbled salamander, occurs pretty much statewide, but really, really small populations in the mountains. But they can be readily available throughout most of the rest of the state, but primarily during breeding season. They disappear during the rest of the year, as do most of the mole salamanders. One thing that marbleds do a little bit differently is that they do lay their eggs in the pond before there's water there. The female guards them, and when the pond is inundated with water in the fall, she'll leave the eggs, they'll hatch, and they'll be on their own for the rest of the time. And then one more mole salamander here, the Mavis salamander, perhaps not quite as charismatic as the last 2, but this is one that's seen a fair number of declines throughout its range. And so we've spent a lot of time looking for this animal, and it's also a pretty cool animal, one I want to talk about a little bit later as well. This family of salamanders, the eastern newt, these guys are probably the most interesting in terms of all their life cycle things. So they lay their eggs in water, they hatch out into larvae, they go into this upland state where they sort of do their rebellious teenage phase and look like either this guy here or this bright orange one or red one over here, and are called an eft. And that eft phase can last for up to 2 to 8 years. It's really fascinating. And eventually they come back to the wetland and then they look like these adults, whether they're, their tail will widen back out and they'll have sort of smoother, wetter skins. This one's a male, this one's a female. And in the eastern part of the state, we have this subspecies of eastern newt, the broken stripe newt. You can see that broken stripe along the sides. And then in the Piedmont and mountains, we have the species, the red spotted newt, like you see on this eft and this adult over here. But really, really super cool animals. They do have a fairly good toxin load, so they can move around during the daytime, but most creatures will not eat them. They have that coloration that says, don't eat me, I'm toxic. And so as a result, generally speaking, they can move around. There are a few things that will eat them, but not a lot. Okay, the last salamander family is a big one. It has over 57 species, lots of different things that they're doing in terms of reproductive habits. Most of the adults, or all the adults, they lack lungs and gills. So this group is called the lungless salamanders. They all respire through their skins, which is pretty valuable. And again, it's another one where lots of genetic work is taking place. Another just absolutely stunner of a salamander is the green salamander. This is one that recently has been broken up into two species. There's the green salamander and the hickory nut gorge green salamander. Both of those are salamanders that are of concern to us and we pay a lot of attention to. Really beautiful, just lichen patterns on those guys. We have dusky salamanders all across the state, and these 5 pictures you might think, well, that's just variation in one. Those are actually all 5 different species of dusky salamanders. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on that today. One thing I will tell you is that you can generally tell that it's a dusky salamander by a couple of characters. Number one, they usually have a stripe from their eye to the back of their jaw, like this little red stripe here. There's a little white stripe there, a little bit of a stripe there, a little bit of a white stripe there, a little bit of a white stripe there. Also, I think of them as the dragster salamanders because they have small front legs and big back legs. So kind of like a dragster with those tiny wheels and big back wheels. Notice that the front legs are generally about, the back legs are generally about twice as big as the front legs, really well demonstrated on this salamander here. That's different from most other salamander species where the legs are, generally speaking, roughly the same size, front legs and back legs. Duskies are really found all across the state. This is just a map showing a complex of a couple species together. But just note, if you're in North Carolina, there's a dusky somewhere near you. We also have tiny salamanders, as this one is well named, the Chamberlain's dwarf salamander, just to show you a little bit of diversity in these things and show you how tiny some of these species can be. That's an adult male on my colleague's finger in the top left there. Two-line salamanders, we have at least 3 species in North Carolina, possibly 4, and so they occur in different parts of the state as well. Males often have these little tubercles that bend down below their lip there, and so those can be useful to identify males from females. But another neat group. Two-line salamanders have a larval phase that usually lasts about 1 to 2 years, and so people regularly find two-line salamanders in creeks near their homes or around about. That's one of the most commonly encountered salamander larvae that people aren't sure what it is. It's usually a two-line salamander. Some of our more brightly colored ones, we've got the mud salamander with mostly statewide distribution, although you see it's a little bit patchy. And then the red salamander, which is mostly found Piedmonts and mountains, doesn't really get into the coastal plain. These are both really, really handsome animals. If you have them side by side, the mud salamander has spots that look like you made with a Sharpie marker, and the ones on the red salamander look, again, more like the leopard frog, where you're flicking that paint. It's just sort of haphazard wherever those spots happen to fall. And our last group of salamanders we'll look at today, our last set, are the slimy salamanders. Each of these 3 that's depicted here is actually a different species of slimy salamander. The one on the upper right is one that you might see in the mountains. The one on the upper left, maybe in the Piedmont, and then the one on the lower left is one that you might find along the coastal plain. So some similar things about them, those white speckling that you see, but sort of in different amounts and little bit differences in their body shape. One of the interesting things about the species in this group they're all in the genus Plethodon, is these are all the ones that do not have a larval phase. So these guys are sometimes called woodland salamanders because they can go a long way away from water because they don't need water for breeding. They can be really, really far away and just lay their eggs under a log. The the log hatches out. The eggs hatch out into tiny versions of the adults, and then they move around, as they see fit. So they don't need a pond for breeding whatsoever. Let's talk a little bit about management related to all of these different species. First off, for a lot of species, fire is a really key component. You might think amphibians and fire doesn't seem like it makes sense. These are things that have moist skins. Is this a good idea, Jeff? What are you talking about? Well, yeah, it is. Fire is really important to maintain a lot of the systems that these animals can be found in, both for maintaining ponds, especially for helping clean them out as they dry down to make sure we have nice fresh vegetation and the pH doesn't build up too high, but also for creating burning out stump holes from dead trees that have fallen, to make these holes in the ground that are really important refugia for animals throughout the year, whether it be trying to get away from extreme heat or extreme cold. These can be just really, really important places. And that's across the whole state. Coastal plain, Piedmont, and mountain stump holes are just really important for a lot of species. Now, timing of that prescribed fire can also be important. Many of the species that we've looked at today actually breed in the wintertime, and they didn't grow up in a period or evolve in a time when fire would have occurred in the wintertime. Now, we use that regularly for prescribed fire, and sometimes we just have to. But if we look at historical context, fire would have primarily occurred in May, June, July, summertime, when we would have had lightning as the source for the ignition. And so if we can move our fires as much as we can into those months, May, June, July, that'll be better off for the systems where these animals live as well as the animals themselves. Because if they're moving across the landscape, going to breeding ponds, and we have fire that's happening in, say, January, February, that's not part of their evolutionary history. They don't know how to get out of the way. But if it's in the summertime, they might already be at their summertime refuge and know what they're supposed to do at those particular times. So thinking about timing of fire can be really important. Isolated wetlands are really important. A lot of amphibians need ponds that dry periodically. This is one that has full, all the water. This is the same pond in the summertime. And so it dried up. There's no fish. There's many fewer predators. You also get better results if you're able to use prescribed fire at this time of year because it can actually penetrate into that wetland. And as I said, refresh that vegetation, remove some of built up organic materials, things along those lines. So some things about isolated wetlands. You want to maintain these on the landscape, really critically important for a lot of amphibians. Sometimes people will do site prep through them or plant trees in them. Those trees are going to die, so it's wasted effort. So it's better to not do that. I'll talk about an example in just a minute. Many of these might benefit from a little bit of canopy opening or even complete removal, but it really depends on the situation. Not all wetlands are the same. A lot of times it can be helpful to have someone come and look at your wetlands to think about whether or not what might need to be happening in that particular situation. But when you have some of that removal, it allows for grassy herbaceous growth to be there, which usually yields greater diversity of all sorts of things in the wetland. And if you're doing prescribed fire in your lands, you want fire to be able to move through these. Don't put fire breaks around the outside of these. Allow fire to go right on through those. That's really important. So here's an isolated wetland on a silvicultural landscape here in Pitt County. This particular one, they did actually site prep through the pond, and they also planted in the pond. Well, all the trees died. The site prep did alter the hydrology of this pond to some degree, but it's not completely eliminated. It still works okay, and it happens to be a wetland that maybe salamanders can use. Now, I've worked with the landowner here, and in this case, they have plans to, in the future, identify a few isolated wetlands that maybe have some specific species of concern in there, and they'll try to not site prep those, and they won't plant trees in those because, again, that is wasted time and effort and money that they could use on other things. So sometimes you can identify those on the landscape and help protect those in various managed landscapes. You can also go whole hog into restoration depending on the situation. So this is one example I want to share with you of a pond on Sandhills Game Lands down there in the Sandhills, of course. This is a pond that really had grown over through the years. So notice in 1950, you can tell where the pond is. And then through the years, lack of fire, this thing actually, you can't even tell where the pond is anymore. So we decided we would go in and take some action. And so in 2011, we clear cut that entire area, not the forest adjacent to it, but the pond basin itself. And then we've had several prescribed fires in the area. And, it looks like this nowish. But okay, it's one thing to say, okay, Jeff thinks it looks good. How about the amphibs? Well, we had 3 species before restoration. We have 12 species that use it now. And actually, 2 of those species are ones that are priority to us. That's a pine barrens tree frog and a tiger salamander. So really can be very valuable thinking about restoration in some of these wetlands. Other factors, so timber harvest in general, I mentioned we did some clear cutting there. It's really complex. So salamanders in general tend to have a tough time with timber harvest. And in some cases, especially in mountain populations, it can take decades for recovery to happen or maybe never. So that's really something to think about. Frogs and toads generally tend to be more tolerant of those kinds of conditions, and they tend to persist. And in generally, if you have isolated wetlands that are also part of this clearing, that can actually cause them to increase or actually do better in those kinds of circumstances. Again, it's one of those it depends type moments. Leaving coarse woody debris can also offset some of these effects. So it's important to think about, what is the landscape context? And generally, if we have larger blocks that we're involved in, if there's some situation that happens, say drought, then that population is going to be more robust and more apt to survive during different kinds of conditions that may take place. So thinking about larger blocks can sometimes be helpful. Generally speaking, less edge is better. Edge is better for predators, and they can really penetrate into those types of habitats that have greater edge. So you would rather have habitats that have less edge to them. So squared or circular types of things are really better than elongated types of things. Stream buffers can be really, really helpful, particularly for a lot of the species I mentioned, like Neuse River water dog, hellbender, some of those fully aquatic salamanders. Notice a lot of times water quality buffers are pretty narrow, 50 feet. That's not a lot. But notice if you want to go all the way out to a lot of the species we're talking about today, we would really recommend somewhere, closer to 300 feet to give those species a little bit more shade, a little bit less stream runoff, all those kinds of things. Sedimentation is a real problem for a lot of species. Connectivity can be important on the landscape. If you can find ways to connect patches, that way, if some of them start winking out, maybe they can be recolonized from adjacent patches. So my good friend and colleague, Chris Moorman, likes to call these cookbook recommendations. He and I used to teach these workshops over a couple of days. So I'm going to go with his terms today. And so, sort of wrapping all this up, consider the historical context of the site conditions of the place where you're working. Think about what are your goals when you're doing management? Are there species that you have interest in maintaining on the landscape? Use prescribed fire if you can. It's really valuable tool. Conserve those isolated wetlands. They're critical for many species of amphibians. Riparian buffers are really important. Wider, the better. Minimize how much site prep intensity you have, as that is harder on animals that really can't move around as much, like our ground-dwelling amphibians. Maintain coarse woody debris if you can. And that's sort of the end of those recommendations. If you have interest in learning more about some of our species, a good online field guide is this one here. You can go to this site and then click on any one of these groups, and you'll get a page with a range map and some pictures of the species, so you can try to learn and identify the ones in your area. Once you get good at identifying, if you have interest in logging sightings that you find, you can use Herp Mapper. And we use this regularly from the community of people in North Carolina. Send us records, and it's super, super valuable. I just updated this yesterday, over 67,000 observations of reptiles and amphibians just from North Carolina, with many of those SGCNs like this four-toed salamander that you see in the picture here. And with that, I would love to take questions that y'all have. Wanted to try to stop a little bit before noon, or before 1 rather, so we can try to get through some questions. I'm going to stop sharing.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.
Quick
Appreciate it.
information.
So we do have several questions that have come in, which is great. We'll get started here so we can try to get through all of them in the time we have left. So I've had several people ask about copies of today's slides. Due to copyrights, we won't be able to share the slides, but we are recording today's webinar, and you'll be able to watch it again if you'd like on the webinar portal. Probably sometime next week, it should be up as a on-demand webinar. All right, so let's get to questions that you can answer. So the next question is, do Southern American and Fowler's toads hybridize?
Great question. Yes, is the short answer. Some of them can hybridize, particularly American and Fowler's toads. I don't know how often Fowler's and Southern toads do hybridize. I think there's been less work on that. But there's definitely good information that American and Fowler's will occasionally hybridize with one another. And so that makes it even more complicated, of course, if you have an individual and you're trying to determine which species it is. So that does happen, absolutely.
Okay, so the person wants to know how to create and enhance the habitat for these unique indicator species. They live in eastern Washington and own an urban depressional seasonal wetland. We have seen the long-toed salamander and have singing frogs.
Yeah, so I'm unfortunately going to have to defer you to some Washington colleagues. I know those species, but I don't know a lot about them. And so it would really be better to seek out someone in your state that can help you know a little bit more about best management practices for those. I apologize. I am a specialist in southeastern amphibians, especially North Carolina, but not as much from Washington State. I would love to see both of those species, but I don't. I'm going to refer you. Look for someone in the Washington area that can maybe help you a little more with that.
Yeah, a good place to reach potentially out to would be your local extension office. They could probably connect you with the wildlife resource professional there in the state. So here's one from James Wershing. He says, birders have been famously acknowledged with a movie starring Woody Harrelson. Do amphibians have any similar nerdy recognition?
Man, I don't think so. Yeah, there's what is it, Bird of the Year or what? Shoot, I'm blanking on what the movie is, but I know what he's talking about. Yeah, I don't know of any other types of things like that. Reptiles and amphibians, generally speaking, are mostly villainized, not lauded. And so usually when we see either amphibians or reptiles in films, they're usually not good guys. They're usually bad guys. One notable film you can look up, it's a horrible film. It's called Frogs from the 60s. And it's all about how amphibians wreak havoc on the world. So it's a terrible movie.
Question that has come in is, what do amphibians and reptiles eat?
Yeah, so I'll focus on amphibians since that's what we've been talking about today. But as adults, all of our amphibians, both salamanders and frogs and toads, eat other animals. They don't eat any types of plants. As tadpoles, many species of frogs and toads will eat plants, algae, things like that. But when they make that shift over to frogs and toads and live as adults, they only eat other types of prey. So they eat mostly invertebrates, but if they're large enough, they'll also eat vertebrates. Same is the case with salamanders, except that as larvae, salamanders only eat prey. They don't eat plant matter. So salamanders, and then as adults, they only eat prey as well. So they're going to eat primarily insects and other invertebrates, but occasionally the larger ones will eat vertebrates as well. It just depends on how large they are. They'll fit things in their mouths if they can.
So this person has a farm in Harnett County. At the base of a tree that had a rotted area at the root base, there was a cluster of what appeared to be eggs. It was protected by small rocks covering the entrance. Could this be related to amphibians?
It could be, although my my guess would be that that's reptiles, especially if they were white, leathery looking. Most amphibian eggs are sort of jelly-like, and they're usually deposited in wetlands. Again, you might find them under logs sometimes, but again, they'll sort of look like sort of wet jelly type things. If they look more white, leathery, those are more reptile eggs. Folks are welcome to send me an email with pictures of things that they find. And I think we have our email somewhere on the webpage. Is that right, Bob? If not, we can add that later. But my email is just jeff.hall@ncwildlife.gov. And you're welcome to send me pictures of things that you'd like help identifying. Glad to do that.
Okay, next question. Are amphibians and reptiles beneficial to agriculture?
Absolutely. As I just mentioned, they eat lots and lots of invertebrates. And so they can be really useful as, removers of animals that would be prey on various types of crops. Very frequently, toads, especially because they're able to go further distances away from water, usually. You'll find toads regularly in certain types of crop fields, and they are eating various types of invertebrates in those systems. So where you can maintain them on the landscape, they're absolutely beneficial for agriculture, for sure. One of the things challenged there is, a lot of times with agriculture, we may need to use chemicals to be able to get the best yield from some of those. And when you do, those chemicals can have negative consequences for our amphibian friends. So it's trying to figure out what's that balance of being able to get what you need from your land, but also maintain some of the species out there.
So, in what ways are salamanders big producers of biomass?
It's just because of how many there are. So there's a paper that looked at this mostly in the Southern Appalachians, and it mostly looked at it in Virginia, West Virginia sort of area, but it certainly extended into North Carolina. So even a tiny salamander, such as a redback salamander, which might be 3 inches long, there are enough of them on the landscape down in the soil, not ones that you would necessarily see on the surface, but down in the soil, there are enough of them that if you added them all up, they actually equal greater biomass than if you added up all the bears and birds and squirrels. You add all those together and you weigh them. The salamanders actually weigh more. Amazing to think about that, but there are papers out there that support that information. So the point of that is there are tons and tons of landscapes, or can be tons and tons of salamanders in certain types of landscapes. They just aren't necessarily evident on the surface. A lot of times they're actually in the soil, down into, deep down into some types of soils.
All right. Do salamanders occur in ephemeral drains in the western mountains of North Carolina?
Yes, they definitely do. Depends on the species, right? So every species that we have has a little bit of a different niche than another one. There's lots of times a lot of overlap from certain types of species, but there will definitely be two-line salamanders there. There'll be at least one, maybe two species of dusky salamander in ephemeral type streams, maybe three-line salamanders, depending on how ephemeral it is. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of salamanders that will use those types of ephemeral streams. Absolutely.
Okay, a coworker had told a person they have concerns about having American bullfrogs in wetlands as they eat everything else. So he was a big advocate for shorter hydro periods. Is that a valid concern?
So bullfrogs are a native species to North Carolina. It's certainly the case that in the western part of the U.S., bullfrogs have been introduced and are a real problem in a lot of areas where they are non-native, and they do tend to eat just about everything else that's there. So in other places, I would definitely say, you'd want to eradicate bullfrogs if you could, say Arizona, California, Washington, Oregon. They have bullfrogs in those places and they don't want them there. So I would definitely advocate for removing them. In North Carolina, it's a little bit different story, right? So bullfrogs are native here. They should be here. They will be a top predator and they can eat other species. Now, the one thing about bullfrogs is they are probably more common on the landscape than some other species of frogs because there are more types of ponds that they can use now on the landscape with lots of little farm ponds and ponds at the edges of developments, things like that, that may not be ponds that dry periodically. If you can alter your pond so that it does dry periodically, it will get a greater diversity of amphibians using it, and it will be more beneficial than one that just supports, say, bullfrogs, or, there are some other species that tolerate long hydroperiod wetlands like green frogs, leopard frogs, pickerel frogs. But like I say, if you have one that has a shorter hydroperiod, you will have a greater diversity. A lot of the tree frogs will be able to use it, things like that, more toad species, things like that. So generally speaking, yes, the shorter hydroperiod is better for more species of amphibians.
So, person is commenting about they noticed that toads and frogs more loudly after a rain event. You can hear more loudly. Is it because the conditions are better for mating, or
That's right.
what is driving that?
Yes. So, because all of our frogs and toads have to lay their eggs in water, they have to go to a breeding site. And generally speaking, when you get a lot of rainfall, you could have water fill a breeding site like the one behind me. And so, once you get water that fills that pond, that's much more exciting to those frogs. And so, as you can imagine, the males call much more vociferously. So they're really getting after it. They're really calling loudly, especially on rainy nights, because the ponds that they have are going to be filling a little bit more, or maybe a lot, depending on how much rainfall. The other thing is, it's difficult for amphibians to move around at night unless it's raining. When it's raining, the landscape is wet. Frogs, salamanders, they can go pretty much anywhere and they don't have much fear of drying up. And so on a really wet, rainy night, frogs can call at will at different places, and they know that there's a good chance that females could move to where they are. Again, only the males are calling. So they know the females can move because the ground is wet, because it's raining. So on those really heavy rain nights, those are some of the most active nights for amphibians for all those different reasons. Yep.
All right, we're going to take a minute. We got a couple slides yet here to share about upcoming programs with the North Carolina Tree Farm program. For those that are interested, and then we'll get back to answering the last couple of questions and then we'll wrap up today's webinar. Just want to remind folks, we have a webinar that's coming up on the bioluminescent insects of North Carolina, and that will be on August 26th at noon. You can find that on the portal. Another webinar that's being offered by North Carolina Tree Farm program. The North Carolina Tree Farm program is also making available free training on CPR, AED, and first aid. And these will be September 2nd, September 9th, and September 30th in Halifax, Asheboro, and Lillington, North Carolina. And you can register online with those at the nctreefarm.org. And just if you need to reach out to the North Carolina Tree Farm program, here's their contact information. And I'll leave that slide up for a minute and let me get back to us answering the last couple questions here. I had a person from Texas wondering if the guidelines that you provided earlier would work for Texas.
Yes, they will work for a lot of Texas. Let's see, South Texas on the coast. Yeah, a lot of the species that are in that area would be very, very similar. So yes, sure thing.
Are there any concerns about identifying rare species so that other people can collect them using Herp Mapper?
Yeah, that's a great question. I put a note in the chat about that as well. But it's worth noting every time you take a record in Herp Mapper, that record is obscured. So if I go to Herp Mapper and I do a search on a particular species, if you don't mark it as private, I can see a dot in the state of North Carolina, but I can't zoom in. I can't tell where it is. I can't figure out where that location is. So that's really, really important. other platforms that are out there only obscure certain species. So HerpMapper obscures absolutely every species. So there's no concern about people being able to find out exactly where those locations are. But that's a great question. I'm really glad someone asked that. So yes, no danger in revealing locations by adding them to HerpMapper.
All right, folks, we've a few minutes past the end of today's webinar, so we're going to stop at this point. I do want to thank Jeff and Leslie. Jeff, your presentation was amazing, very informative and everything. Thank you. Your enthusiasm, you can tell you do love your amphibians.
I love what I do. It's true.
Yes. And Leslie, thank you and the North Carolina Tree Farm Program for making this possible and bringing it to not just North Carolina, but to a national and international audience.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Jeff, for the fantastic presentation. If anybody is interested in learning more about the North Carolina Tree Farm Program, our contact information is on the screen, and we would welcome a conversation with you and look forward to seeing you in August for our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.